This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. That is Matthew 5:16, guys. I am so thankful to be here today. We've got really one major subject. I guess you can call them two major subjects to get into today. But as always, I want to give a big thank you to our donors, guys. If you're wondering how we can keep doing the show, I even learned here recently that we are the number one show in the world that is specifically for Christian men, which is kind of crazy, like to think about, this is kind of a part-time thing, and then we kind of burned the ships a few years ago, and now here we are. Guys, we couldn't do any of that. We couldn't be in the ears of any man in the world that's wanting to be equipped to push back darkness without guys like you, and now we're number one. We need donors. We need guys like you that are in the fight, that want to see men all over the globe equipped to be able to push back darkness. And so go to our donation page on our website. It's just Undaunted.Life/donate. That is in the show notes. Also, leave a review. Haven't asked you guys to leave a review in a while, but that's the thing, is when you start getting some 1- and 2-star reviews because people don't like the music and people don't like, the tone and tenor of something like that. If you guys like this show, leave us a 5-star review. If it's 4 or below, just move on with your life. Just don't worry about it. But today's show is kind of a bit of a microcosm of what this year has been like for me, 2024. 2024 has seen some of the biggest highs and accomplishments. And I just mentioned one. We're the number one show for Christian men in the entire world. It's still just kind of mind boggling. I'm so humbled that you guys are still listening. So there's some big, big highs, and we're going to talk about one of those today. But man, just some absolutely crushing lows. Some that you guys know about, like with Roman the Giant dying, and some that you guys will probably never hear about. It's been one of those years. This has not been a neutral year at all. And so before I get into talking about something that's fun and exciting, I need to talk about something that's not so fun. And that was the loss of one of my Foxhole brothers. And so some of you that follow us on Instagram and Facebook, you saw a couple of weeks back that I posted that we had lost a member of our Foxhole. I didn't mention his name at the time because at the time I was posting that, he had just died the night before, and there was still family that had not been notified and all that. And so it was just kind of a bad situation. But his name was Zach Foster, and died of a pulmonary embolism at the age of 38. So this occurred in the church parking lot. His wife ran out to him. He fell out of his truck. They rushed him to the hospital, but I think for all intents and purposes, he basically died right there with his wife. I get to the hospital. This is after I had received word that he passed, but I was just like, okay, I need to get to the hospital to see what I can do to minister to people there, not because I'm special, just because that's what you do. You go and you see what you can do to help people. And as I'm walking in, I see his father and his brother, and it's, as you can expect, they had just gotten word in the last half hour that their son had died. On the inside, I was, there with his in-laws, and he was also close with our pastor, Mark Hitchcock of Faith Bible Church in Edmond, Oklahoma. And, the pastor, Mark, was kind of telling me, he's like, yeah, they came out to give us an update, and they said, look, we can't even get him back to the cath lab to try to get his heart going again because he's still in trauma mode, which I guess that means they were still shocking him and giving him CPR just to try to get him back. And so at that point, Mark knew that it wasn't good, and he passed away. And we just kind of stayed there in shock, and I'm there with a couple of other Foxhole brothers that knew Zach well. And obviously a guy in his 30s dying of pulmonary embolism, that's not something as far as I understand it, that's a blood clot in the leg that goes to the lungs that ends up in the heart. And this was a man that had been to the heart hospital 3 times this year, and he died on a Wednesday, and the Monday of that week, so 2 days before he died, he was at the heart hospital for a checkup. And Mark Hitchcock, our pastor, said something poignant again about that. He said, look, if you think we can number our days, that's just an example of God is the one that numbers our days. That you're telling me that it was the best. He was at the best heart hospital in Oklahoma, right? He was at the heart hospital, right? And you're telling me they couldn't find something on Monday that could have prevented what happened on Wednesday if that wasn't what was supposed to go down. And so, I had to break the news to some of his friends, which was really tough. And it was a horrible situation. But his wife, Hannah, they've been married for a few years, and they have a not quite yet 1-year-old daughter named Grace. Hannah comes out from the back, and I'm sitting there, and I just kind of pop up oh my gosh, and then I'm just ready for whatever, is she going to fall down? Is she going to melt? But God, I don't know. It reminded me of the strength my cousin showed when she gave the eulogy at my other cousin's funeral. My cousin CJ that passed away, the police officer that was killed in the line of duty. And she got up there and just delivered this great eulogy and didn't, crack even once, right? And so she comes out and she just seems like strong and, exasperated, but still strong. And I'll get to that more here in a second. And she looked at me and the other guys and she's like, do y'all want to go say goodbye? I was kind of frozen by it. And, Zach Todd, who's a forging tabler, he was there and he's like, if that's what you would like us to do, and if that's okay with you, we'll do it, which was the perfect response. And then that's what we did. We went back there and, there he was. And, it's tough. It's tough to see a guy that had so much life. And obviously, if you've ever seen someone who's dead, it's not any fun because there's no life there anymore. And so that was pretty rough. And then it got into, funeral planning and all these types of things. But then all these stories about Zach just started kind of rolling out. Because here's the thing about Zach. I knew Zach in college. And Zach in college was your typical frat guy, typical, athlete, just kind of a douche, right? And he would say the same about the guy he was in college. Just take what you would think and frame as typical frat guy athlete, and that's the type of guy that he was. But not that long ago, really just a few years ago, Jesus snatched this dude up. And he is the most insane example of someone I know personally who Jesus just completely reordered his life, reordered his priorities. And I say this lovingly, he was annoying about Jesus. Like, he would talk about Jesus all the time. We'd be sitting at coffee or at lunch or something like that, and someone would be walking by, and he would just like bring up a conversation about Jesus. It was like breathing to him. But as interesting as that is, the thing that was so incredible about Zach is his ability to do things for others. That's why I talked about Matthew 5:16 from the beginning of the podcast. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Not see your good deeds and glorify you, but see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. This is a guy that was just constantly wringing himself out for the benefit of others. And so I'll tell a couple of stories for me personally. So, everybody's got to move a fridge at some point. And so I hollered Zach because I knew he'd be around this area. And I was like, hey, Zach, if you can just help me move this fridge into this old house. And the thing is this was a modern fridge and this was a 100-year-old house. So what do you think the process of getting it through the door was? Well, we get it to the door and it's an old, it's a smaller door and it's a bigger fridge. And so long story short, we end up having to basically take this fridge completely apart to get it inside, to rebuild it inside. So it goes from, hey, help me carry it inside to, no, we're going to just have to completely redo this. And he just did it, didn't complain, didn't cuss, didn't nothing. He just, he was so glad to be able to hang out with his buddy and be able to help him. That's just the guy he was. But there was another time where I had borrowed a trailer from somebody and, I didn't grow up, doing a lot of stuff like that. So I didn't grow up pulling a lot of trailers. And so, I made a mistake with the trailer, a mistake that you make once. But as I'm driving down the road, luckily it was a road no one else was on, the trailer actually popped off the ball. I know, stupid, but it happens. Hey, if you guys think I'm cool and smart, hey, I try to give you as many opportunities and as much ammunition to prove to you that I still do dumb things and I do them constantly on a daily basis. And so it pops off, but it's not a catastrophic thing because I had the chains on there right and I crossed the chains because that's what you're supposed to do and all that type of stuff. But long story short, part of the trailer had bent. And the thing was, I had borrowed a trailer from somebody and I needed to get back to him the next day. And in my head, the very first person I thought of that could help me in this situation when I'm on the side of the road was Zach Foster. So I call Zach, and not only does he answer, right, like a typical 3 a.m. friend does. It wasn't at 3 a.m., by the way. It was probably 3 in the afternoon. He goes, oh, yeah, man, tell me where you're at. I'll come. So it's the middle of the day for him, and he drops everything he's doing to come out. And he kind of, he's helping me evaluate and, let's see if we can do this, see if we can do that. We get the trailer back to my house and we're kind of, tinkering with it a little bit. And then he just kind of looks at me and goes, hey, Kyle, when do you need to get this trailer back to your buddy you brought it from? And I'm like, dude, tomorrow morning. He's like, okay. And he's kind of pausing and he's like, all right, cool. Let me just take it and I'll take care of it for you. And I'm like, okay, pause, Zach, take care of it for me. Like, what does that mean? Like, what are you going to go do? He's like, no, just don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. Like, I'll call you tomorrow. So he calls me in the morning and he tells me, hey, meet me at this shop. And so I go to the shop. Zach had pulled this thing that was bent back into alignment. He had welded it and he had repainted it. All before the next morning when I needed to return it to my buddy. So I make a mistake, right? And this is a mistake that could have, cost, if it had gone catastrophically, it could have really hurt somebody. But this was a mistake that should have cost me a lot of money, a lot of time and things like that. But Zach's like, no, I'll just do it for you. And he wouldn't let me pay him. He's just like, Kyle, like, I like doing this type of stuff. And there were just tons and tons of stories that were coming out about Zach Foster doing for others, because he's a handyman. He's a Mr. Fix-It. He was on the handyman crew at our church, and he would go and help, widows and all these other, single moms and stuff like that, like fix stuff at their house. And he would just, obviously just do that stuff for free. Unfortunately I was out of town for his funeral for some pre-booked travel, but I watched the funeral on YouTube. Just hearing these stories of what Zach had done, and it takes us all the way back to like, man, like God, like why him? Because, people will say things like, oh, gone too soon. But it's like, if we believe that God is numbering our days, there's no such thing as too soon in the economy of God. But it's like, why? Like, why a guy like that? A guy that's been on fire for Jesus just over these last few years, and the impact that he's had, like in our children's ministry at our church, the widows and single moms ministry, and like helping set up the audio visual stuff. And like, he was just at the church constantly serving people. And it's like, why a guy like that? Why not the lukewarm Christian that's like basically just like amoebaing their way through life? Like, why a guy like Zach Foster? And it's a question that we can ponder but never actually get the answer to. But I can tell you, as I wrap up my comments here, a guy like that is a guy that leaves a lasting impact because of the way he lived, not necessarily for the words that he said. And this is what I mean. Since I was gone, and felt very guilty that I couldn't be there for the funeral, but I text a lot of guys like, how was the funeral? Like, how did it go? Like, how did the family look? Like that type of stuff. And to a man, these guys text me back and they're like, man, it was brutal. It was sad, but it was such a celebration of life. And boy, was it challenging. And the reason why it was challenging was because there were, I think, 4 or 5 different people that got up to speak about him. His brother, his boss, an older man in our church that was kind of mentoring him. And all of them were basically talking about these amazing things that Zach had done. And it was some of the same things that I've said, just the selflessness. And so guys that were in the crowd, like other Foxhole guys of mine, are like, dang. Man, you think you're serving Christ and you think you're serving people, and then you see a guy like Zach who's serving Christ and serving people, and it took me back to the hospital room when I'm saying bye to him, and I didn't say it out loud, but I just thought to myself, man, if he's not in heaven, none of us are going. Because it's like, you want to talk about fruit? I give John MacArthur a hard time because it's like, you don't feel less saved than after you listen to a 60-minute sermon from John MacArthur about what it takes to be saved, right? And if your fruit is sweet enough. But if we can talk about it, the fruit that Zach had as an offshoot of his following and discipleship of Jesus Christ was so sweet and so abundant. And it was just, it's a guy that you don't forget, because if you ever think about, hey, I want to be selfish here, hey, I don't want to help this person, you end up thinking about a guy like Zach and a life of service that he's had. And so with all that said, before we close that out, I did want to let you know there are a couple ways that y'all can help the family, because his wife was like working like really part-time because she was basically raising their little baby, who I think is 11 months old as of the recording of this podcast. There are a couple ways you guys can do that. So there's the typical way that everybody kind of understands, the GoFundMe side. And so there's a GoFundMe link here in the show notes, guys. I would love if you could, help support this family and this baby. And I know GoFundMe takes a percentage, but for a lot of you, it's just kind of easier to do. But also our church Faith Bible, there's a way to help through there. It's a little bit convoluted. Believe me, it was a dumb thing. I can't believe they didn't just like add a line item for this family temporarily. But I got a link to the Faith Bible giving website. Now in the drop down box, which is to the right, so you put your amount on the left, but to the right, there's a drop down box. Select Benevolence Fund. Okay. Benevolence Fund. So I have it from the pastors of that church that the funds that go into the benevolence fund are going to be used to support the Foster family, to support Hannah and Grace. And so you can do GoFundMe if you want more of a straightforward approach, or you can go to the Faith Bible website and put in an amount and go to the benevolence fund. I really, really would appreciate that. Hey guys, real quick. As you've heard me describe before, I am incredibly conservative about the supplements that I take. I spent years being terrified of putting different products in my body because I didn't know what they were made with or if it was going to be kind of fly-by-night companies using all kinds of crazy ingredients. So I've always wanted to partner with an American company that only uses the highest quality ingredients, and that's why I want to remind you that we are partnered with Jocko Fuel. Jocko Fuel is Jocko Willing's supplement company that is based here in the United States. So what are some of my favorite products that they make? So they make whey protein powder, and guys, they just released a cookies and cream flavor not that long ago, and it is ridiculously good. Make sure you use it with milk. It makes it even better. They also make clean energy drinks. I finally decided what my favorite was, and that's pink lemonade. That is my favorite of all their flavors. But they also have the best tasting greens powder on the market. I prefer the peach flavor myself. They also make pre-workout and ready-to-drink protein. So I actually mix the ready-to-drink protein in my boys' milk, and they love it. They're constantly like, Dad, banana milk, banana milk. So we got to hook that up in the Thompson household. But I also use their krill oil, fish oil, creatine, vitamin D, and their sleep aids. And guys, they've got new stuff coming out all the time and a bunch of stuff I didn't even have time to mention. Guys, if you take your health and wellness seriously, then you simply can't afford to put cheap and inconsistent supplements inside of your body. Try Origin out today by going to www.jockofuel.com. That's jockofuel.com. Use the promo code UNDAUNTED to get 10% off your order. Again, that's jockofuel.com, promo code UNDAUNTED to get 10% off your order. All right, guys, so there's no quick hitters today, unfortunately, because I've got a lot of things I want to talk about, but I want to talk about something awesome, and I need to make sure that I gave an ode to Zach Foster. But in the coming weeks, there will be a quick hitters bonanza because we're planning something special for episode 666. Ooh, right? Isn't that exciting? We're playing something special for that. So we will do a quick hitters bonanza. We'll be getting to all the crazy stuff that has been in the news cycle. But we need to talk about September the 17th of 2024, okay? So on that night, I was given one of the greatest honors of my life, and that was receiving my brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from the Forge in Edmond, Oklahoma. So before I get into, the festivities of the evening and my experience that night and all my other stuff that I want to talk about, I want to actually break down the statement that I just made again. So that was the night I was receiving my brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu from the Forge in Edmond, Oklahoma. So receiving my brown belt, the receiving part is you could rightly say that I earned my brown belt, right? Because it's like, oh man, you earned your brown belt. Congratulations. But I see it as receiving my brown belt. And this is why, because it was a gift that I had to receive from my professors. So we have about, I think now about 20 black belts affiliated with the Forge in Edmond, Oklahoma, directly affiliated. But I basically am under the tutelage of just a small handful of them because those are the classes that I normally go to. And I'll talk about some of those guys here in a little bit. But basically at our academy, this isn't a time-based thing. They basically evaluate you individually. So you, the type of athlete you are, what size you are, how much you weigh, what your age is, the amount of time that you train, whether or not you compete and how often you compete, how do you do when you compete, when you go over to the other schools, how do you do against, non-familiar opponents, those types of things. And by that, they will evaluate you on the white belt to blue belt to purple belt to brown belt to black belt scale. And at our school, we don't really have like lifetime achievement belts where it's like, oh, well, you've been around for, a few years, so I guess we'll give you your blue belt. That's not really what's happening. So it's something that you have to earn from people that know better, as to whether or not you are that thing. So receiving brown belt. Okay. So that's the progression that I've already talked about, white, blue, purple, brown, black. And just to kind of give you an idea, because I know you can get, your black belt in karate after like 18 months by some fat dude by the airport. This is something where if you train all the time, like, when I say all the time, I mean, 3-4 times a week, it's going to take you 10 years to get your black belt. There's been some savants that have got their black belts like in really short time. I think BJ Penn got his black belt in 3 years, but this is something that takes a very, very long time. I mean, by the time you get to black belt, you basically get a PhD in choking people, right? Like that's essentially what it is. And so that gets into the other part of the statement, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. This is a legitimate fighting style. This is hard to climb the belt ladder. This isn't like Wing Chun or Bing Bong or whatever these different fighting styles are that would never work in a real life situation. And again, I just point you to something like MMA. In something like MMA, if a guy is a really good wrestler and has a really good jiu-jitsu, it's going to be really, really, really hard to beat him, even if you have fantastic striking. And that's the most elite form of fighting is MMA, like specifically in the Ultimate Fighting Championship. But in like a street fight, you're not running into Alex Pereira, right? You're not running into, John Jones. You're not running into guys like this. You're running into, for the most part, normal dudes. And so Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu basically becomes a superpower because when you've trained for long enough, when you train with somebody that's never trained before, it's like dealing with a baby, right? They don't understand why they can't do anything, but you understand exactly why. Another part of that statement, the Forge, that is the best school in Oklahoma, and that's our reputation. So that may seem cocky. It just kind of is what it is. Because I was literally talking to another brown belt the other day. He said he went over to another school just to go to their open mat, and they asked him where he trained at, and he said the Forge, and they were like, geez. Because they were like, crap, I know what's coming, right? Because, we got some hobbyist guys, but we got some real legit, like world-class guys at the Forge. And so all in all, we have the best school in Oklahoma as far as I can say, at least in my opinion. And then last part, Edmond, Oklahoma. I feel so ridiculously blessed that the best school in Oklahoma is located in my city, 10 minutes away from my house. It is literally the closest Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school to my house, and it just happens to be the best one, right? So, and the thing is like, you don't have to go to the best school to be really good at Jiu-Jitsu. You don't have to go to the best school to get benefits from Jiu-Jitsu. But the fact that one of the best schools around, and the school with the best reputation probably in the entire state, is right by my house, I feel very, very, very blessed by that and for that. Now, Jiu-Jitsu, for most of you guys, this has been a big time center point for the show. But I just want to kind of like do a quick commercial here that even if you're not a jiu-jitsu guy, which some of you guys have already turned this off, I guess, but even if you're not a jiu-jitsu guy, do not skip this episode. There's surely a nugget or two for you here, so please just stick with us. And I know a lot of you guys have started training jiu-jitsu because of the show. The number of guys that have bought Origin gis. Again, guys, go to the Origin website, use our promo code Undaunted. It's the best gis. They're 100% made in America, great rash guards, the whole 9 yards. And a lot of you guys have started training because I get the messages all the time. And I even get guys that are like, hey, I live in New Orleans. Do you know any good jiu-jitsu schools here? And I just kind of tell them like, guys, you just got to go and, just experience different schools and different teams and different atmospheres and see what's going to work well for you. And I'm so glad that you guys have started training because of the stuff we've been saying on the show. And jiu-jitsu is really, as I've said before, one of the best ways to develop physical and mental resilience because it is very difficult and it's something that's very taxing mentally, especially when you first start. You're not as exhausted physically as you might think. You're really exhausted mentally. Your brain burns more calories than anything else in your body, than any other organ in your body, certainly. And so the brain is something that is working on overdrive when you have no idea what's happening to you and you have no idea what the other person's doing, what they're about to do. And so you're just exhausted. And so there's a lot of resilience, and I can talk more about that later. But when I've been promoted, okay, so from white to blue and then from blue to purple, and now from purple to brown, it actually gives me an opportunity to kind of sit back, take a deep breath, reflect on my jiu-jitsu journey that started in the summer of 2017. So one of the ways that I can do that and why I can always remember the year that I started is because I've done entire episodes about my jiu-jitsu and my jiu-jitsu journey on this podcast. And it's honestly the reason that I can remember it's because I remember that I launched this podcast, guys, the same year that I started doing jiu-jitsu. Okay. So the summer of 2017 is when I started doing jiu-jitsu. And later on that year is whenever I launched this podcast, because I can remember episode 5 of this podcast was called 6 Months of Jiu-Jitsu. So I started my jiu-jitsu journey, my real jiu-jitsu journey before the show was even a thing, guys, right? So for those of you that have been around for a long time, you can see, we're at 661 episodes. Like, it's a lot, right? But episode 5 was 6 months of jiu-jitsu. Episode 62 was blue belt. Episode 279 was purple belt. Now we're at 661 with brown belt. So you really, guys, you should go back and check out those episodes if that's interesting to you, so you can kind of see how my voice sounded before I had 2 vocal cord surgeries versus now. You can kind of see the stuff I was saying then and how dumb I was about certain things. But I've actually revisited my notes from those episodes because it's, really interesting to kind of remember my mindset and remember where I was mentally during those different points of my jiu-jitsu journey. So I'll give you like a quick highlights of those episodes. So in episode 5, that was 6 months of jiu-jitsu. That was released January 18th of 2018. And so it was released after, the year I started. You get it. But I went through my athletic history, my lifetime interest in MMA and fighting, joining Fight Club. That's kind of like my Foxhole group. I joined that on July 10th, 2016. And the reason that I know that date is because the day before was UFC 200. And so that's when I met most of these guys. They're like, hey, on Sunday nights, we get together and just roll a little bit of jiu-jitsu. And so 2016 is technically when my jiu-jitsu journey started, but that was just like a once a week thing. And it was officially in 2017 whenever I joined the Forge and, started, put on that white belt for the first time and got in there and got my butt kicked. And so, I talked about flirting with the idea of doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for real, finding the Forge. I talked about the immediate lessons I learned. I learned about humility because, it just kind of is what it is. You're getting your butt kicked. Really the power of jiu-jitsu when you start really kind of figuring out certain positions and how you can control people, and how also Brazilian jiu-jitsu can be for everyone. All you have to do is train. Talked about my first tournament. I talked about one of the greats of all time, Andre Galvao, giving me my Brazilian jiu-jitsu nickname. So he called me Viking. And I also talked about the spiritual, mental, and physical connection. Then on episode 62 of this podcast called Blue Belt, that was released on February the 14th of 2019, I talked about getting my blue belt. I went through the lessons that I learned since episode 5. I talked about 3 things that I need to make even better in my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu game. So that was, heavier on top, like heavier top pressure, getting the takedown, keep that dog hungry. If there's a scramble, make sure to be the guy that ends up in the better position. But then I also talked on that episode about 3 things I need to fix in my Jiu-Jitsu game. So being comfortable off my back, more on that in a second. Being dangerous from my back, more on that in a second. And not getting stuck in bottom side control, which, that's just kind of a thing. That's a hard thing for a lot of people. And then on February the 3rd of 2022, episode 279, that's when I talked about getting my purple belt, biggest lessons I learned. I talked about, from no training to white belt, your ego will kill you. And from white belt to blue belt, you just got to get the mat time. And from blue belt to purple belt, you just really need to slow down. You're going to suck in different positions and all that, but just try to slow everything down. But then from purple belt to brown belt. Okay, this is actually following up on what I said on episode 279. I'm not really sure right now, obviously, what my biggest lessons learned will be. Or in that episode, okay, I was talking about from purple to brown, what I thought my lessons were going to be. And so it was like, hey, maybe focus on more technique and focus on higher percentage moves and positions and submissions, train enough to where, you're doing the basics right, not really doing all these obscure Instagram moves and stuff like that. But now we need to get into this episode 661, called Brown Belt. Let's get into the lessons that I learned in my journey from purple to brown, okay? These are the lessons that I took away. There's a lot more than these, but I just kind of narrowed it down. I figured out what kind of jiu-jitsu fighter I want to be. This was really, really important to me, and this is wisdom that I've tried to pass on to other people that are just starting their jiu-jitsu journey, which is figure out the type of jiu-jitsu fighter that you want to be, and then build your training around that. So the gal, Katie, that runs our office there at the Forge, she came up to me one day before our Tuesday night class, which is, the class that I'm basically at every week. And she goes, hey, Kyle, I put up the new tournament signups and everything like that, and I didn't see your name on it. Why don't you compete more? And I was like, I hadn't really thought about it, but I kind of went back to a Robert Frost moment I had, road diverged into Yellowwood type of thing. You can only go left or right kind of a thing. I remember when I got my purple belt. I got my purple belt 2 or 3 months before Elijah was born. So our second son. And so when Elijah was born, I felt like I had kind of that Robert Frost moment. It's like, okay, am I going to chase the competition route, train in a way to where you can go and represent this school at the top of the podium on a regular basis, maybe travel for tournaments and those types of things? Or do I want to be just a really nasty training partner? And I mean nasty in a good way, right? Where the guys that are competing all the time, the guys that are traveling to go compete in national and international tournaments, that when I roll with them, they're probably going to get the best of me, but goodness gracious, they're going to have to work for it, right? They're going to get to some dominant positions, but then I'm going to escape, or they're going to get to the sub and I'm going to just move just at that right time to get out of that position, right? And that's kind of instinctively what I chose, being the nasty training partner, because for me, being in competition mode, and some of you well-adjusted people out there are not going to understand this, but if I'm competing on Saturday, I am a wreck all week. I'm angry. I'm on edge. I'm keeping my weight under control. And so maybe not eating as much as I would normally eat. And in my mindset, and I've talked about this before, I have to get into the mindset where it's like, all right, if this person's not going to tap, I'm just going to have to break it. Right? That's just my mindset. Because it's like, look, these are not my teammates. In a competition, these are not my teammates. These are not my friends. These are not people that I care about. So if they're not going to tap, I will break it. If they're not going to tap, I will drop their passed out body in front of their weeping mother. Right? That's kind of where I go in my head. And imagine having a wife and 2 small children, and imagine kind of being on edge. Again, for you well-adjusted people, you're like, we'll just turn it on when the competition happens. Well, I'm glad you can do that, buddy, but that's just not really available to me, right? I'm still a work in progress, right? So leave me alone. And so it's like not having that stress or strain or anxiety of a competition has actually made me better in the room, because when I'm going with some of these guys that do travel a whole lot, I'm like, all right, it's go time. Like this is my competition. And also this is that for them. And I'll even ask some of these guys that have tournaments coming up. It's like, hey, is there anything in particular you're looking for, anything you're worried about, or your positions or something like that? And then we can kind of get after it from there. And so for you guys that are starting your jiu-jitsu journey, figure out what type of guy you want to be. If you're 50 years old and, you're just trying to do something to get a little bit of exercise, yeah, you're probably not going to be training to win Masters Worlds, right? That's probably not going to be something that you're going to be doing. But if you're 25 and you're pretty athletic and you're already in good shape and you're wanting to kind of build this lifestyle, okay, be a competitor. And then you can kind of, coalesce that around the type of gym that you're going to be at, and the types of classes you're going to go to, and the types of people you're going to be around. And so that'll be great for you. So that's one thing that I learned from purple to brown. Also, I learned about longevity over brutality. So all the way up to purple belt, I wanted to go to the most brutal classes with the most brutal people doing the hardest rolls for the hardest amount of rounds. And I wouldn't tap into the very, very last second. But like I said, I think in my first 4 years of jiu-jitsu, I lost a year because of injuries. And a lot of those were because I just wouldn't tap, right? So I would get my neck cranked in the triangle. Oh, no. Okay, and then I would tap. As opposed to now, after having trained for, 7.5 years or so, there are certain positions where I know I'm got. You know what I mean? Like I'm in this triangle. I could really, really go crazy trying to get out of this thing. If this were a street fight situation and my children's lives were on the line, okay, I could probably figure a way out of this triangle and, deal with the injury later. But now I'm just like, tap. I've tapped to arm bars that I know the guy is about to get and my hands are about to come apart, and I'll just go ahead and tap, right? So you got these guys that'll get extended and they're starting to move all around, and then they get up and their shoulder hurts. It's like, yeah, no crap, dummy. Like you were sitting there like destroying your arm trying to get out of a triangle at 6:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. What is wrong with you? There are no lights, there are no videos, there are no sponsors here. Like, what are you doing? And so I really, really focused on that in purple belt, and getting the iron neck was a huge benefit to my neck and overall health with jiu-jitsu, because you're constantly getting your neck cranked on all the time. But just focusing on, I want to be good for the long term. I want to be rolling in my 40s and 50s. And so yeah, you're going to have some brutal classes, but don't seek those out. I don't roll on back-to-back days. Typically give my body a little bit of time to recover. So that's something that I focus on purple belt. Also, last kind of big lesson that I learned from purple belt to brown belt is slow it down for me, but speed it up for them. And so my approach when rolling, and again, I want to be a nasty training partner, and I want to be good for guys that are actually way better, that type of thing, is I want to use pace as a weapon. So you may have heard people talk about Randy Couture was kind of the first MMA fighter that used pace as a weapon. He was in such good shape. He got some anabolic help as well, but he was in such good shape that he could put a pace on you for a full 25 minutes. And so he didn't have crazy knockout power. He had really good wrestling, but he didn't have really good submission game and stuff like that. But it was just pace. He would just break guys down, and then finally they would give up their arm or give up their neck or just get TKO'd, right? That was his approach. I'm in really good shape. I keep my cardio in shape year round. I keep my strength in shape year round. And so when I get into some of these rolls, and I especially get into some of these scrambles, it's like, you're not going to out scramble me. I'm going to go, right? We're all going to get exhausted at different points and, those types of things. But when I feel you taking a big, deep breath, boom, I'm moving and I'm going. And so I want to slow it down for me, really think about what I'm doing, be methodical, but I want the other person to be like, holy crap, Kyle's moving like crazy. There's another guy named Luke, dude that goes to my church, great dude. He also got his brown belt about a week after I did. He couldn't be there the night of where we all got promoted, but he got his brown belt. And when he and I roll, it's, we're about the same size, been training about the same amount of time. But I remember one time after we got done rolling, he was completely exhausted. And then class ended, and he came up to me and he goes, Kyle, what cardio do you do? Cause he's like, I thought I was in shape, but there's something different. It's like you had a different gear. And the thing is when I roll with this guy, I have to go to that different gear because he's so technical and he does so many different things, and I'm constantly have to think about what he's doing. So I'm using my cardio as an additional weapon. And so that's kind of the thing when you hear guys that are like, hey, don't use your strength or all that. I'm not big on that, because it's like, would you tell someone that's flexible to not use their flexibility while rolling? Would you tell someone that has really good cardio, don't use your cardio while you're rolling? So it's like, yeah, if you need to use strength to get out of a position or get into a position, yeah, freaking go for it. So in terms of from brown belt to black belt, here are my expectations. It's all about sharpening the sword at this point, because it's like, you know what you're doing. Yes, you're going to learn some new positions, you're going to learn some new things, but it's about you've got your sword, you want to make it as sharp as possible. So the things that you're good at, you want to be elite at. Also, mat time is still key, right? So I've known guys that have gotten their brown belt and stopped training. And I'm just like, golly, I know brown belt's not ultimately the destination, I guess not. But it's like you get to brown belt and it's like you're almost there. You just have to keep mat time. You just have to do the boring stuff, which is just keep going to class and just go to class again. And then next week, go to class some more. So, mat time is going to be key. And then also from brown to black in terms of expectations, I don't want to view black belt as the goal. Okay. I thought when I first started training with white belt that black belt was the goal. But along the way, I realized that black belt is not the goal, but it's the standard. Okay. It's one more step in the journey. And just in general, guys, I am for standards over goals. And the reason, and I always use this example, let's say I'm going to bed tonight and I have a goal to wake up in the morning and to lift, right? To go into my garage and to lift. But then I wake up and I didn't really have a nice night's sleep. And, my wife and I fought before we went to bed. And so, I didn't really get as much sleep and she's still mad at me. And, the kids were kind of crying out during the night and one of them came in the room and I'm still a little bit sore from yesterday. And man, I really think I'm just going to take care of my body today. So I didn't meet my goal. But I don't have goals. I have standards. So I know that regardless, tornado notwithstanding, that when I wake up in the morning, no matter how I feel, I'm going to go and get after it. The same thing, you have people that have a goal. Maybe their goal is to do a sprint triathlon. So they train. They do the sprint triathlon and then they take 3 months off, right? So it would have been better for their overall health, for their longevity, had they not trained for the sprint triathlon and just like trained like a normal person for 6 months, as opposed to training for 3 months, doing the thing, and then taking 3 months off, if that makes sense. And so in terms of this, the black belt is not the goal, but it is the standards. And it's just the next step. I've known guys that have gotten their black belt and then they're like, oh crap, now it's on. And I'm like, what do you mean? They're like, okay, well, when you're a white belt, you're evaluated as a white belt and you're evaluated with other people that have only been training for that length of time. So typically you get your white belt in less than 2 years, or your blue belt in less than 2 years, maybe 3 years, right? But then you get to black belt and you realize, okay, I've been training for 10 years. And now you're training with people that have had their black belt for longer than 10 years. Think about that. Because black belt's just wide open. Yes, you get stripes on your black belt and then there's coral belt and all that kind of stuff. But you have guys that have had their black belt for over a decade. You've been training for a decade and you just got yours. So all black belts are not created equal. And so if black belt's the goal, I know some black belts that have stopped training. They get their black belt and then they don't train anymore. It's like, yeesh, like why would you go through all that for all these years and then just think, oh, I'm good? I mean, yeah, you can pick some stuff up like riding a bike, but other than that, it can be pretty rough. Now, I did realize that I forgot to kind of talk about what we do in terms of the Forge. So at the Forge, basically the way that we do it is everyone that's getting promoted for any belt, their names are called, they're put in the middle, and then basically everyone else gets in line, and that could be 75 to 100 people, and they call out a starting position. So it could be open guard or side control or something like that. And then you go until there's a submission or a sweep of some kind, and then the person being promoted stays in and a new fresh person comes in. And when there's like 75 people in line, they're mega fresh. But if you're getting promoted to brown or black, it's not white belts and blue belts running in on you for the most part. I basically saw purple, brown, and black, and there was one blue belt who's like a world champion caliber guy that I'll talk about a little bit later. Those are the only guys I rolled with. And you roll for basically an hour and a half. There were 2 60-second water breaks, and there was like a 2-minute break where, people who were in no-gi stuff, you had to throw your gi on or whatever. And it's hot, there's all these people in there, and you're just trying to survive. And that's the whole point, is towards the end, they're not rolling as hard with you, that they're just trying to keep you moving. And then for the guys that got their black belt, I think there were 4 guys that got their black belt that night. Those guys had to roll with every other individual black belt in the room until there was a sub. And so an absolutely brutal evening. I mean, I was literally in bed, and I felt like my head was vibrating and like my ears were like on fire because I was still hot. I'm sitting there laying down at like almost midnight and my heart rate was still like going crazy. So it was a crazy, crazy time. But I also wanted to give kind of an honest assessment of my game and areas of improvement real quick. So this will be interesting for any of you guys that are kind of like evaluating yourself. You should always evaluate yourself. But in terms of my game is really predicated on the takedown. So that's, I want to get 2 points. If we're going to end up on the ground, I want to get 2 points. But if I'm being lazy or tired, if I get caught, they're going to pull guard, right? So, I can typically count on one hand the number of times in a year that I get taken down. It's just, I have a really good base, and it's just something that I really focus on not being taken down because I don't really want to be on my back. But my game is take down or let them pass guard, or let them pull guard rather. For me to pass guard, pressure, pace, explosiveness, control, take the sub if it presents itself, but not force it. So that's one thing. Like I get into some positions and I feel like maybe I stall a little bit because it's like, well, I could go for the sub here, but I might lose position. So, but that's essentially my game. In terms of my areas of improvement, this is what I would say, and I think my coaches would echo this. I have to get in more no-gi. So yeah, probably in the gi, I'm a brown belt at this point, but I've really neglected my no-gi over the last couple of years just because of how my schedule's worked out. I haven't been able to do as many no-gi classes. So I'm going to take care of that, in this part of my journey, start doing some more no-gi. And just to make my top game even better, because I am a top game player. And so a lot of people would think, well, why don't I just like make my bottom game better? Why don't I just do bottom game the entire time? And, my top game will just stay good. Well, there's a couple of guys that I've, trained with or know about that are black belts that have been black belts for a long time. And you'll know these guys, Chad Robichaux and Tim Kennedy. Both of these guys are top game players. Both of these guys have told me individually that if I am on my back, I'm either playing around or something has gone horribly wrong, right? And so these are not guys that spend a bunch of time training and drilling stuff off their back. They're decent off their back. Well, they're not decent. They're great. Both of these guys are great off their back. That's not what they focus on. And both of these guys, military background, fighters, MMA fighters, those types of things. They're like, Kyle, I don't want to get myself in the mindset of playing bottom and getting better at bottom than I am on top. And the reason is because if I ever have to use jiu-jitsu in a real life scenario, and my first thought is berimbolo or rolling under somebody to try to get into a leg entanglement or something like that, well, guess what? You've entangled the guy's legs, but now he's pulled out a knife and he's stabbing you in your stupid legs. Now he's pulled out a gun and he shot you in your dumb face, or he's not armed at all and he's just slapping you completely. Is it possible for you to berimbolo or roll under a guy, get his legs and, break his leg or break his ankle or tear his knee apart? Yeah, certainly possible. But I will say in a real life scenario, I want to get the guy down to the ground so that I can keep my head up as I'm holding him down, probably knee on belly, to see if he's got any other buddies around that are trying to kick me into the next planet, right? And so top game, top pressure. Again, I'm not doing a lot of competition jiu-jitsu. I want top game, top pressure, because if I ever do have to use this in real life, I don't want to be on my back. If my shoulders are on the asphalt, something has gone wrong. And again, you're throwing up a triangle because you think you're slick. Well, if this guy's kind of a freak beast, or if he's high on drugs or something like that, he's going to lift you up off the ground. And if you don't let go, he's going to spike your head on the back of the pavement, and that could be lights out for you forever. So, all right. Also, here's a message to those of you that are already doing jiu-jitsu, okay? Especially if you're relatively new here. Here's my advice for some of you newbies. I know there's some white belts and blue belts listening to this, okay? First bit of advice. Figure out what kind of jiu-jitsu fighter that you want to be now and proceed accordingly. I've already talked about that and elucidated that hopefully fully earlier. Also, just tap. Just tap. When I roll with some white belts and some blue belts, I'll get them into bad spots and I will just let go because they're not tapping. They're trying to get out of it. Guys, just tap. If you're getting beat, if you're about to get hurt, please just tap. Like, even in a tournament, even if all the blood's pumping and your teammates are watching and there's your kids and your wife and you want to make sure that, you don't look like a puss or whatever the thing is, I get it. Just freaking tap. Because you have guys get their, shoulders destroyed or elbows broken or, just bad stuff happen in these tournaments. It's like, well, dude, now you can't train for like 6 months. So that was dumb. You could have just tapped and trained again tomorrow, right? Also, be a good teammate. So if you are not a competitor and you're going with guys that are competing, give them competition level energy. If you are a competitor and you're rolling with someone who's not a competitor, don't try to kill him, right? This guy's just a hobbyist. Let's make sure he can come back and keep training. Show up ready to go, show up bathed, put on deodorant, make sure your gi is clean, make sure you're not wearing that same funky rash guard that the moment you put it on, it automatically starts to stink. Just be a good teammate. And also just stay on the path and don't quit. Again, everyone talks about the blue belt blues. You get your blue belt and then you stop training, right? Just don't do that. Make this a part of your life. Again, it doesn't have to be the main thing in your life, but just make this a very, very center point of your life. Stay on the path. Don't quit. But now we need to talk to you people that are not training jiu-jitsu. This is not something that you've done, or you've fallen off the wagon. Maybe there's some people listening to this. You know who you are, that got your purple belt, and then you stop training because you think you're tough enough. Yeah, I see you. I see you out there. Here's what you're potentially missing out on if you're not training, especially if you've never trained before. The first thing is it will take care of your pride issue if you got one. So jiu-jitsu has not killed my pride, but it has significantly diminished it. My goodness. Because when you come in, you're pretty strong, you're pretty athletic, you've done some things, and then this small, nerdy, non-athletic, non-strong person wraps you up in a pretzel and literally, I've told this story before, but when I was rolling with Tyler Murrah, I was a white belt. He was a purple belt. He ended up going on to be a world champion, opening up his own gym in Midwest City, Scrap City. So shout out to Scrap City, Midwest City. Like, we're the same size, right? We're about the same strength, but he's purple and I'm a white belt, right? And we're rolling and I'm on bottom and I'm trying and blah, and all this. And he's at the edge of the mat. He sees a bottle of water. We're rolling. He reaches over, grabs a bottle of water, unscrews the top, takes a drink, screws the top back on, sets the water down, and the entire time I'm trying to escape. And I can't. If you got a pride problem, you will never show your face in that gym ever again. But this helps take care of that pride. Okay, so Proverbs 18:12, this is probably the best scripture to quote during Pride Month. Before destruction, a man's heart is haughty, but humility comes before honor. You've got to be humble if you're going to train. Also, you'll be confident in your physical ability to end a threat and thus protect yourself, those you love, or strangers that are image bearers of God. So many of you guys that don't train jiu-jitsu, so many of you guys that are, your wives don't like guns, so you don't own guns. You certainly don't conceal carry them. None of you guys know how to physically protect anybody, much less yourself. And I hope this doesn't happen, but there might be a day coming where the wolf visits you this time. And he's going to try to hurt you or someone you love or even a stranger that can't help themselves for whatever reason. What are you going to do exactly? Call the police? Like when seconds count, help is minutes away. If coming at all, there are places all over the United States that 911 calls are not being answered or not even being responded to. Well, you're there. What are you going to do? Oh, well, I just hope I never get in that situation. And that type of, well, you can crap in one hand and hope in the other and see which one fills up first, guys. If you are not actively trying to figure out how to be a threat, two threats, then it's not going to work out. You're going to be in that situation, and it could be your life. It could be the life of someone you love or the life of another image bearer of God that you were not standing ready to be there to protect. And part of this is because of the next piece of advice or thing that I wanted to point out is if you're not training jiu-jitsu, you're likely leaning into, if you're leaning into any physical activity at all, you're leaning into a physical activity that has zero transferability and zero transferable benefits to everyday life. You've heard me talk about this before, and I know I rail on golf all the time, but here's the thing. Driving a ball into the fairway or chipping a ball into the green from 50 yards out or something like that has no transferable benefits to everyday life. Let me take you back to that scenario. The wolf has visited you. It's go time. He's trying to kill you, right? You can't say like, wait, I got to grab my pitching wedge, right? Because even in that, like, you're not going to use the pitching wedge in the way that you would use it on the golf course because you're swinging it this way. And I'm assuming you're not going to swing that if you're using it as a weapon against somebody. You're going to be swinging it like a baseball bat or an axe or something like that. So if you spend all this time golfing, and guys, if you love golf and it's cathartic for you and all that, great, good for you, but it's not transferable. You go golf 2 times a week. What's that? 10 hours of your week that you've spent just doing a leisure activity where you don't even break a sweat unless it's 100 degrees outside, right? So if you want to do that, that's fine. But if you're not preparing yourself to be in a fight that you can end, right? Or at least stem until help arrives, then what exactly are you doing? Are you leaning into these other physical activities because they're fun and not really that demanding of you? Because golf is a hard sport, but it's not physically demanding, right? I think, everyone's like, well, look at Tiger Woods' body. It's like, I think he hurt himself on his 40th affair. He threw his back out or something like that. So let's not pretend like golf is like this horrible thing on your body. But maybe you're playing pickleball or maybe you're doing something else. And if you want to do these activities, that's fine. If you want to play, if you want to do ping pong and you want to do bocce ball and frisbee golf and all these things, great. I don't care. Great. Do those things. But if you're doing all those things and you can't fight, what is the exact plan here? Explain this to me. Yes, do physical things that are fun. Play games, play that silly game where you bounce a yellow ball on the little mini trampoline and run around, whatever that's called. Play blitz ball or wiffle ball. Do it, right? I'm for all those things. But if you're spending a lot of time doing those things and you can't fight, what's your plan? Oh, well, I've got injuries and I'm worried about getting. Yeah, If you learn to fight, you will get some bumps and bruises. You may even get injured. But is it better to be physically prepared for the wolf, or is it better not to be? So if you're not training jiu-jitsu, you need to get real. And the last thing here before we get to some quick odes to teammates of mine is you are avoiding, if you're not training jiu-jitsu, you are avoiding perhaps the best way to develop physical and mental resilience because you're scared. Because the main reason why people don't train jiu-jitsu is because they are afraid. They are afraid of being humbled. They're afraid of being injured. They're afraid of being exposed as someone that doesn't know how to fight. They are afraid of close contact. So there's a good buddy of mine who did jiu-jitsu a couple of times. He's like, I just couldn't be that close to another sweaty guy and things like that. I was like, okay, scenario. Wolf, sweaty guy, he's now mounted on top of you and he's trying to kill you since you're the biggest threat in the household. And then he's going to systematically kill the rest of your family. Oh, and he's sweaty. He's sweating on you. Oh, it's dripping in your eyes. What's your plan exactly? Oh, please, I just want to reason with you. No, you're going to die. Like, again, some of you guys are like, why are you driving this point home? It's because so many of you guys just don't get it. You're scared. I understand. Like walking into a room with a bunch of people that you don't know, putting on a weird thing called a gi and not knowing how to tie your belt and all that. Yeah, it seems very, very intimidating. I understand that. But it's what's required. Think about all the things that you've accomplished in your life that started with you not understanding, needing training, and then using that training either to sell a thing or to accomplish a thing or develop a thing or build a thing. You had to be humble and you had to be taught and you had to train and you had to get better, and all that took time and effort. And physically speaking, resilience is what you need, not strength. The ability to bounce back. Jiu-jitsu gives you that. Mentally, you're going to have classes as you train and go on where you're the hammer, and then you're going to have a bunch of classes, way more classes along the way where you're the nail. And can you mentally get over the fact that I've spent an hour and a half of my day getting smashed by my friends, but you walk out with a smile on your face because you're like, you know what? I got better. And also, you know what? There are people out there that are not training right now. So the wolf that might be coming for me, the wolf that, has my name in their book or whatever, he didn't train today, but I did. So something to chew on there. But before we wrap up, I do want to give a quick ode to some of my teammates. This is I just want to give a general major thank you to all my teammates, all my training partners, everyone that I've ever rolled with. But specifically, I want to give some quick shout outs and thank yous to the following folks. So Rob Harper, he is our main professor at the Forge. And so I trained a lot with him at white belt. And so basically none of us get promoted. He's the one that put the brown belt on me. None of us get promoted if there's not a Rob Harper. Then we got Rush Sweatman. He was my first Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coach. So he runs that fight club group, that group that gets together on Sunday nights. And he's ran that for like 15 years or something like that, maybe closing in on 20 years. And so he's the first guy that was really kind of teaching me different things. And also a really cool thing, at one point as I'm getting destroyed on the mat, I look over and I see him and two of his kiddos at promotion night. So I don't know what Russ had going on that random Tuesday night, but he took time out of his schedule to make sure he showed up to specifically watch me go through the promotion night and get my brown belt. So very, very thankful for Russ. And then we have Steve Jones. So he's the main professor that I trained with during my purple belt run. Okay, so he is basically just a gi guy, and he's the type of guy where his style is like, I call him creeping death because we both like Metallica, but his style is slow and methodical. It's not super explosive and athletic, but you could even know what he's about to do and you can't stop him. His pressure and his technique is so razor sharp. And, every Tuesday and Saturday, basically for the last, 2-3 years, I've been training with Steve. And so my game would not be anywhere close to where it is right now without Steve Jones. Then we got Chris Cunningham, another black belt from our professor. Without him, we wouldn't even have an academy. So he is the owner of the Forge, one of the part owners of the Forge. And so without Chris Cunningham and his dedication to the sport of jiu-jitsu over his career and to bringing in other black belts and doing, different seminars and, doing improvements to the gym, like, I feel like some guys just don't really realize how unique of a spot the Forge is, and that has a lot to do with Chris Cunningham. So thank you to him. Also, Livingston McKenzie. So this guy, he's there to let me know that you can be roughly the same size as someone and not even be vaguely the same thing. So the way I describe Livingston to people is in a few ways. So he's a black belt, been a black belt for a while, but he's also been like a stand-up fighter, and he teaches like Muay Thai and kickboxing and stuff like that. So he's like all together the most dangerous human being that I know personally, and we're the same size. And this dude, if you met him, you'd be like, gosh, that's like a really nice guy. This is a guy that you'd walk into the office and he's doing your taxes and you're like, I like that guy. Or he's working at the office. He's got his khakis on and his slippers, and he's got his, polo on, well, not slippers. What would those be? I don't know, dress shoes, whatever. So he comes into the gym, he's just bebopping and all that and that type of thing. And if you saw this guy in public, you'd be like, oh, looks like a nice guy. Maybe he played a sport back in the day. He looks like he's in shape, but you wouldn't think dangerous. The thing with Livingston McKenzie is he can choose how he would want to kill you physically. Do I want to head kick this person to the next, county? Do I want to take him down and choke him to death? Do I want to break his arms and systematically break the rest of his limbs? That's what this guy is capable of doing. And so this is a guy that still to this day, I've never scored on. I even told him that the other day. He's like, wait, you've never scored on me? You never even gotten a takedown? I'm like, no. Like, I have a pretty good idea of what I've gotten on who and different things like that. This is a guy that I've been deep in on a double leg before, but he got out of it. I've been, elevated with a single leg, and he got out of it. And the thing is if he's even trying at all, I have no shot. And so rolling with him is fun because I know I'm not going to get hurt because he's really controlled, but it's also like whatever I am, he's like at least 25% better. So like I'm explosive, but he's really explosive. Like I'm strong, but he's really strong. Like I'm athletic, but he's really athletic. Like I have some technique. He has like amazing technique. He's like 100% better than me in technique. So very, very thankful to have a guy like that around. It keeps me humble. Also, need to talk about Jet Thompson, no relation. This young man started training jiu-jitsu, I think when he was like 4 or 5 years old. He's 17 now. He just got his brown belt not that long ago, but for all intents and purposes, he's a black belt. I think he's had over 300 matches in tournaments. A lot of them have been professional matches. Even as a purple belt, now as a brown belt, he has routinely beaten black belts in no-gi. That's a name y'all need to remember. So if you follow jiu-jitsu at all, remember Jet Thompson because he's won some ADCC, local tournaments. I think he won it in Austin and Kansas City or something like that, Chicago. Very, very impressive young man. He was homeschooled and finished school at 16 so that he could just focus on jiu-jitsu. They have a jiu-jitsu gym built out in a garage or shop at his house or something like that. Very, very, very impressive young man. I'm glad to call him a teammate. Another guy that I've never scored on, to my dismay. One of these days, he won't just sit down at the beginning of the roll and I might be able to get a takedown. Then we have Ethan Sample. This is a young man who's a blue belt, who's got a lot to accomplish at blue belt. Still, he's a very dedicated guy. He's very methodical. I honestly think, just like Jet Thompson will surely be a world champion someday, I think Ethan will be a world champion someday. When I roll with Ethan, the thing that's unique about rolling with Ethan as a blue belt, right? He's probably 30 pounds lighter than me. He can't really overpower me. The thing is he just overloads my brain when I roll with him because he never stops switching positions and going here and going there. And when we're doing warm-ups, I will typically drill the same move maybe 3 or 4 times and switch to another move and switch to another move during warm-up. He will just do a different thing every single time. This thing to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. The guy is just incredible. I'm really, really excited to see how he progresses. Then we've got Dylan Dennis. So he is another brown belt. He was on SWAT with my cousin CJ. And the reason why I wanted to give him a thank you is because, he was an OU wrestler. He's maybe an inch shorter than me, maybe 10 pounds lighter than me. So we're roughly the same size or whatever. But I mean, he's got about 20 more years of grappling on me, right? Because he was a high level wrestler. But when he and I roll, especially in the gi, it is so brutal because we'll get matched up and it's like, crap, I got to roll with Dylan. And hopefully he thinks the same. He's got to roll with me. Most of our times when we roll, after 6 minutes, it's still 0-0 and we are completely exhausted because we've just been trying to take the other one down the whole time and we can't really get it. Now, he definitely beats me more than I beat him. If I beat him, it's because I get lucky, stuffing a takedown and maybe I can move to side control. And so I might, win 2-0 or something like that. But I just love rolling with him because he's such a high-level wrestler. He's so much better at the stuff that I'm good at. And so it's kind of hard because it's like you feel like you're just smacking your head against the anvil when you're going with a guy like Dylan. But he's such a nice guy, but you can just tell he's got that murderer inside of him. I wouldn't be super surprised if he had killed people and buried their bodies in the rainforest at some point in his life. He's that kind of guy where you like him, but you want to make sure you keep him your friend. And so shout out to Dylan Dennis. And the last shout out before we literally float to the end here is to Trevor Fulbright. So here's the thing about Trevor. Trevor was a blue belt when I started. Okay. And so, we train and, he's a taller guy, got longer limbs. And so you got to worry about some different things. He loves triangles and, different collar chokes and things like that. But what I didn't know when I first started training that I came to realize is that this guy lost like 100 pounds along the way and doing his jiu-jitsu journey. So for some people who are like, I need to get in shape before I do jiu-jitsu. It's like, no. Use jiu-jitsu to help you get there faster. And then over the years, he's become like a teacher. Like he'll teach some of the classes. He's really big in the 5:45, 6 a.m. Class in the morning. And he's just consistently trained. He's just there, and he's consistently taking care of his body after basically spending the majority of his early life not taking care of his body at all. And the night I got my brown belt is the night that Trevor got his black belt. And it was interesting because I went back, the night I got my purple was the same night he got his brown. So we're kind of like in the same timeline or whatever. And I went up to him afterwards and I just, I embraced him, and I mean, it was just such a big deal. It's because he is resilience. Not just resilient, he's resilience. That's what his life has been, man. Because he could have just like cashed it in and been like, I'm fat. I guess I'll just be fat forever and die young. All right, give me some more Cheetos and, Code Red Mountain Dew. Nope. That's not what he did. He started super duper taking care of himself. He has turned himself into an incredibly good jiu-jitsu fighter. He's a black belt now. He's a black belt, and I'm pretty sure he trained the next morning after getting his black belt, after one of the most brutal things that I've ever witnessed, watching him get his black belt. And I'm just so thrilled for a guy like that, because I preach about resilience all the time on the show. And some of you guys get it, but a lot of you guys do not get it. And the thing about it is you've got to be like Trevor. If you're starting at a deficit because you're overweight, okay, it is what it is, but keep going. All right, you get some bumps and bruises along the way. Maybe some things go wrong at home, or some things go wrong with your job, or things don't really work out the way you thought it would here in this life and that life, or that part of your life, or whatever. You just keep going. Be like Trevor Fulbright. So shout out to him. Guys, thank you so much for listening to the show today. I know it's very, very jiu-jitsu heavy for some of you guys that aren't big on that. But again, for those of you that aren't training, it's time to get after it. Guys, I kind of just did my outro, but then I forgot to do the quick resilience boost, and I didn't want this to be like the first time I didn't do that. So at Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So we've got our donation page there, and just wanted to remind you guys that we do want to support Zach Foster's family. So there's the way that you can give through our church, through the Benevolence Fund, and the way through the GoFundMe. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.